Treadmills are the world's most popular piece of exercise equipment, and sales have only gone up during the pandemic. Sales of treadmills in the United States were up 135% in the last year. In 2017, sales of home treadmills reached nearly $1 billion, which is about 3 times the sales of treadmills to gyms. The fitness industry estimates that around 53 million Americans use a treadmill at least once a year. You might have a treadmill in your home, and it might get a lot of use, or it might be gathering dust. But while treadmills are primarily used or not used for exercise today, you might be surprised to find out that they have a very long history, and for thousands of years had nothing to do with exercise. It is history that deserves to be remembered. Similar to the water wheel, some of the earliest treadmills used a wheel-shaped device to power a machine. In the 1st century AD, the Romans invented the polyspaston crane, which seemed to have been originally powered by 4 men using winches. The machine itself is huge, with a large wooden crane arm and many pulleys and masts to increase the mechanical advantage of the machine. The strength of the machine was further increased by the addition of a tread wheel, powered by a person or two walking within the wheel, very much like a gigantic hamster wheel. This allowed Roman construction workers to move 6,000 kilograms, or over 13,000 pounds, alone. This technology was used to allow the Romans to build some of their most impressive structures, including tall aqueducts. There are 2 other kinds of early treadmills that also make use of human power. One essentially has a horizontal bar sticking out from a vertical shaft. 2 people could grab the bar and walk around the central shaft. While often powered by animals, they were powered by humans as well. The final type involves a wheel that sat at a slope, allowing a walker to climb it and turn the machine. Roman Pliny the Elder describes using treadmills to power pumps that pulled water out of mines, saying that men stood night and day in shifts, measured by lamps, bailing out water and making a stream. Versions of these treadmills have been found throughout Roman Europe in mines from Spain to Romania, as well as in Wales. The use of tread wheels for cranes fell out of use in Europe after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, but the technology began to reappear in the Middle Ages. By the 13th century, references to a Magna Rota reappear in France, and as harbor cranes across the continent later. Treadwheel cranes were instrumental in the building of lofty Gothic cathedrals, used to move enormous stone blocks. Walking-powered mills were used widely for industrial uses, like pumping water out of mines, from the 1st century AD through the Middle Ages and into the early modern period. These machines were also used to carry water and even power dough-kneading machines and blacksmith bellows. By the 19th century, mills were in wide use as machines on farms, helping to grind wheat, churn butter, crush apples, grind minerals, and knead dough. They could be powered by rivers and creeks, wind, the human hand, and of course, animals. Some treadmills of the period closely resemble what we use today as a manual treadmill, with an enclosure that would keep a horse walking on a conveyor belt to power the machine. Smaller versions were made to do things like churn butter and could be powered by smaller animals. Dozens of inventions had dogs, running sewing machines, odd automobiles, and butter churners. In 1818, Sir William Cubitt, an English civil engineer and millwright, became interested in using mills as a means of reforming prisoners after viewing their idleness at a nearby prison. Prisons at the time struggled to provide enough work for growing prisoner populations, with prisoners doing most of the work the prison required, including sometimes using tread wheels to pump water for the prison's use. Cubitt's goal was somewhat different. Instead of having them accomplish necessary work, of which there wasn't enough, he would create a machine at a large scale to make the prisoners work, even if the machine did, well, nothing. To reform offenders by teaching them habits of industry. The first was installed at St. Edmund's Jail in Suffolk. Cubitt's tread wheel perhaps resembles a modern stairmaster more than a treadmill. Typically, Cubitt's machines were horizontal and 20 feet long. They had 24 steps around a 6-foot cylinder. Prisoners would essentially ascend an endless staircase, holding onto a bar to keep their balance. They also often had partitions so the prisoners could not talk to their neighbor. While a few of them were installed in the United States, the penal treadmill was widely used in the UK. Some of the machines didn't actually do anything besides force prisoners to work, grinding the wind in the parlance of the day, but others were built that could pump water or grind corn or wheat. Perhaps the most famous one was installed at Brixton Prison in 1821 and supplemented a windmill to grind grain. Prisoners would walk on the machine for hours at a time, usually for 6 hours, but in some prisons for as long as 10 hours a day. Prisoners would climb somewhere between 5,000 and 14,000 vertical feet in a day. At the Warwick Jail, prisoners were recorded walking 17,000 vertical feet in the space of 10 hours. At their height, 109 of 200 prisons in the United Kingdom used the machines for punishment. 4 were built in the U.S., although 3 of those were quickly abandoned. A New York prison guard praised the machine as a means of punishment. He said it was the machine's monotonous steadiness and not its severity which constitutes its terror. The treadmill at Bellevue Penitentiary in New York even had a specially built viewing house so people could jeer at the prisoners. In the UK, the Prison Act of 1865 required every male prisoner over 16 sentenced to hard labor to spend at least 3 months of their sentence doing labor of the first class, which consisted mostly of the treadmill, and also cranking, where prisoners would endlessly pull a crank that did nothing. Machines were actually considered more humane than some earlier forms of punishment, such as being sent to the colonies, but still the experience was not good. Oscar Wilde spent 2 years on treadmills for gross indecency with certain male persons. Later he wrote a poem about the experience, saying each man suffered in his personal hell. We banged the tins and bawled the hymns and sweated on the mill, but in the heart of every man, terror was lying still. The penal treadmill began to earn a reputation for being excessively cruel. In 1850, a Gloucester Journal author described prisoners on a treadmill and said that one could not fail to be struck by the air of languor and almost misery, which always marks labor not lightened by reward. One writer in the Edinburgh Review criticized it even more severely. The labor of the treadmill is irksome, dull, monotonous, and disgusting to the last degree. Man does not see his work. The treader does nothing but tread. He sees no change of objects, admires no new relations or parts, but is turned at once from a rational being and put upon a level with a rush of water or a puff of steam. Criticisms like this combined with changing ideas of how to reform prisons. An 1882 article from Scientific American said that the convicts hated it and no useful results came of it. The author suggested attaching dynamo-electric machines to the cranks to store as electricity the energy developed. This meant that society could benefit from the work of the prisoners. Combined with poor diets served at prisons, they were the cause of many injuries and even deaths. In 1885, the British Medical Journal chastised the Durham prison for the death of a prisoner with heart disease on the treadmill. It was heavily critical of the fact that prison treadmills caused deaths as often as once a week. A 45-year-old prisoner was imprisoned for a 14-day sentence of hard labor for a theft on October 22, 1894. Was assigned to the treadmill. He seemed healthy, but soon complained of chest pain. The doctor couldn't find anything wrong and sent him back. On November 1st, he had been in the mill for only 5 minutes when he fell backwards, dead. The mill is not useful and has proved itself occasionally injurious, the author concluded. Dealing with how to reform criminals was a vexing problem for societies in the modern era. In the U.S., the Prison Discipline Society of Boston determined that the treadmill teaches the convict nothing that can be useful to him on his discharge. It is not a profitable employment of human power. The U.S. shifted to prisons as factories, making shoes, brooms, and other items of use. It wasn't just England and the United States who forced prisoners or others to do work on the treadmill. In 1781, a hospital in France, with an incredibly deep well, tasked workers and later epileptic and madman patients to run the 72-person machine. Women were made to run the machines as well, in the UK and in China, where an American company wrote that the women are hired for a few cents a day to stand on this log and keep it turning by stepping upon each one of these projecting arms that look like croquet mallets. In the UK, a letter in Newcastle Chronicle admitted that prisoners hated the treadmill thanks to accidents, but that fierce denunciations against the inhumanity of subjecting females to the implied torture was unfair, as women rather liked it. Hard labor as a means of reformation became largely antiquated, and by 1895 groups in the UK were calling for its abandonment. In the UK, a Prison Act in 1898 banned treadmills in prisons in 1902. Once imagined as a means of punishment, the treadmill would see a massive reassessment in the 20th century. The first U.S. patent for a treadmill training machine was issued in 1913 and sought to solve a very different problem than the penal treadmills. The 1920s saw these devices as a health device, although they were expensive. They had no motor and instead would be powered by the user, pushing with their feet. First they had wooden slats, and later ones introduced fabric as a surface. A treadmill for dogs, called a dog exercising device, was patented in 1939. The 20th century saw a massive shift in causes of mortality. Until 1910, infectious diseases were the deadliest, but soon heart disease became the largest cause of death in developed countries. By the 1960s, nearly 4 in 10 deaths in the United States were caused by heart disease. The first medical treadmill was invented in 1952 by doctors Arthur Bruce and Wayne Quinton. Bruce is known as the father of exercise cardiology and used his treadmill to develop the Bruce Protocol, the first diagnostic test to monitor cardiac function. His treadmill was motorized and is the forerunner to today's exercise treadmills. Initially, many were skeptical, thinking that the treadmill was more likely to kill people than save them. It took nearly 2 more decades for treadmills to become something that a consumer would own or see in a gym. In 1968, William Staub, an American mechanical engineer, read Aerobics by Dr. Kenneth Cooper. Cooper noted in the book that patients who ran for 8 minutes 4 or 5 times a week were healthier than those that didn't. With his son, Staub developed the lightweight, affordable treadmill. He built a prototype he called the Pacemaster 600, which he sent to Dr. Cooper. Cooper was impressed and began introducing the device to its first customers, including people already selling fitness equipment. The treadmill shown in The Jetsons in 1962 actually presaged the treadmill for humans, which appeared in 1968. The machine solved one of the primary barriers to the growing popularity of running as exercise: seasons. It has even made it to space, where it's not so easy to just take a walk outside. Since Staub's invention, the basic shape and design of the treadmill has remained pretty much stable, and treadmills have come to be a ubiquitous sort of exercise device, although they're not a perfect replacement for outdoor running. But many people have a difficult relationship with their treadmill, using it maybe not quite as often as they hoped that they would when they bought it. The advent of electricity and increasingly sophisticated machinery turned the treadmill, and indeed the animal or human-powered mill of nearly every kind, to be inefficient. But the basic concept of using a force to produce power still remains the basic design of most power sources, from hydroelectric dams to nuclear power plants, which use water and steam to spin turbines to produce electricity. While their design and purpose have changed over time, treadmills are incredibly important to human history. They helped us to grind grain more efficiently and have been used to build some of the world's most impressive structures and edifices, going all the way back at least to Roman times. A 2010 study in the journal Medicine and Science in Sports and Exercise found that Americans only walk an average of about 5,100 steps a day, which was notably less than groups that were studied in countries like Japan and Switzerland and Australia, and significantly less than most doctors recommend for optimal health. So the next time that you're on your treadmill trying to get in a few extra steps, maybe you can imagine that you're helping to build a Roman aqueduct or a Gothic cathedral. Or maybe you can imagine that you're a prisoner in a 19th century British prison. In any case, it seems likely that humans will continue to walk in place well into the future. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history. And if you did enjoy, feed the algorithm by making a comment or clicking that like button. If you have suggestions for future episodes, please send those to our suggestions email box. Check out our webpage at thehistoryguy.net. And of course, we're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo and check out our merchandise at teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes of Forgotten History, all you need to do is subscribe.